So why don't we get
Absolutely.
why don't we get started?
Great.
Um, Hi everybody, welcome to Word on the Street Live. Jeremy is off in interesting places this week, so you just have me, and incredibly fortunate to be joined with Jen Rubin, who the founder and editor of the Contrarian, incredible new publication that I am a contributing writer to, and it's really doing the incredible work of standing up for democracy during this, vital time in the Trump era. Incredible suite of writers and all kinds of just really revolutionary work you all are doing.
Thank you.
You know, and excited to have you here to talk about all kinds of interesting things. Well, with the American Jewish community, Israel, and your
Absolutely.
perspective on these things, and also also on like what's happening in the world of Trump and like fighting for democracy. But so in this you're seeing this. Hopefully, we have some of your subscribers coming in, obviously from the Contrarian. We have Jeremy's from Word on the Street and mine from Dialogue and Dissonance. So welcome everybody. Jen, I'm gonna start. I'm gonna start with the question, which is, I was reading your piece today on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and it really feels like there's a moment, like a political moment, a humanitarian moment, like a moral moment, like here in Israel, elsewhere. Like, what is your take? Tell people about it.
It absolutely is all of those things. This is a man-made starvation, and it was made because there was a very deliberate policy from the Israeli government to take down the existing infrastructure that was doing, I don't want to say a terrific job, but at least a minimally competent job of continuing to feed the people of Gaza. And remember, Israel has both a moral and a legal obligation to tend to those people's needs as an occupying power during a war. So this is not just they want to be nice. This is they must do this. They decided to take all that down. They stood up another group that was hugely inexperienced, that centralized the distribution so that there was mass chaos and then violence. They justified this because they claimed that Hamas was systematically stealing food, something the IDF later debunked. And the result is starvation. And it is a disgrace and a bold faced lie for the prime minister of Israel to say there's no starvation. This is fake. My God, a country that was born in the ashes of the Holocaust is going to deny those images. That is beyond the pale. And that's, I think, what has so triggered the international community. And I think it has empowered those in Israel. As you know, over 70% of Israelis no longer think that there's a purpose to this war. They want it to end. They want the hostages to come home. They don't approve of this conduct. You're seeing more and more vocal and kind of dramatic shows. You here in the United States, in the right, on the left, even Donald Trump has figured out that there is starvation in Gaza. And you see slowly some of the mainstream groups from the Jewish community begin to raise the alarm. As I point out in the piece, groups like J Street or the Jewish Democratic Coalition were really much further out front. And that's because I think they lead with their values, that they have made a commitment that you can be pro-Zionist and pro-democracy. In fact, you have to be, that these two things are inextricably linked. And so when you see this catastrophe, this man-made catastrophe, it calls out for a response. And those of us who love Israel, who have defended Israel, who often point to a double standard for Israel, there is no excuse for this. There's no defending the indefensible. And as Jose Andres said, who I quote in the piece, you call it what you will. We can have debates about whether it's a war crime. It's controversial whether it's a genocide or not. You don't have to get into that to demand that this problem be addressed fast before more people die. And frankly, this administration, the American administration, has enabled a lot of this by this loose talk about ethnic cleansing, by giving Bibi a free rein. And oh, by the way, why didn't we make a condition of our help in the Iran war that the Netanyahu government would bring this to an end? And the answer you come away with, sadly, is that he wants the war to continue because it means his political survival. He's afraid that his coalition will fall apart. He's afraid that he'll lose power and then be subject to prosecution. And there is not a military purpose, and that's a moral to continue to fight this war. So I think the public hue and cry is unusual. You're right. It's reached a level and reached a breadth that you don't normally see in these debates. And I think the vivid images have a lot to do with that.
Yeah, yeah, and Jen, I'll just add a couple of things on this. I wrote a piece earlier this week on my Substack about just some of the myths that we're hearing, and you saw it again today with the Israeli government. I mean, I think like the biggest myth being this myth that like that the humanitarian crisis is entirely the making of Hamas and the UN. Like, look, the UN, will tell you, as somebody who worked in the Biden administration and worked really hard on humanitarian issues and have been working on these issues for years, like the relationship between like aid providers and the Israeli defense forces is like terrible, like has been for a long time, and like yes, it could be better, and like it would help the UN if it was better, and part of that is also on the UN. And on top of that, Hamas has done all kinds of horrible things, including like deeply problematic stuff. They don't care about the humanitarian situation, like, but none of that excuses like
Yeah.
what the Israeli government is doing. Right? I mean, and and what's really important to also understand is you know, ultimately, like the UN can't just move food in. They need to work with the Israeli Defense Forces who actually create the pathways. Like, and they need to be able to deconflict. They need to be able to not drive a truck in and have it just attacked by an Israeli strike because there was no deconfliction, or the Israelis don't let the UN drive anywhere other than like right through a big Palestinian population center. It's all this kind of like, you know, well, it's just they need to get the aid, and that piece has really been infuriating me. And I saw something else just this afternoon that really like infuriated me. It was a tweet from the Prime Minister's office, and it said, "We're dropping aid into Gaza. Everybody else needs to also." Like, let's be clear. Like, aid drops, I have nothing against like dropping food into Gaza, but like that's a teeny tiny little fraction. You need like 300 to 500 trucks a day of food going in. One plane is less than one, amount of food for like a truck, like a fraction of a truck. Like this doesn't really like do the problem. So when the Israeli government is out there saying like, we've solved the problem, everybody else needs to come in, like we're dropping aid, like it's so deceptive and like, just stop guys and get the food in, like is kind of like
Exactly.
um,
Exactly. And by the way, if it was so easy, why weren't they doing this before? Your comment about it doesn't justify it. Listen, you could go back to October 7th. None of this would have unfolded if not for the horrendous, grotesque invasion and the sexual violence and the murder that went on. But war crimes, international law, moral responsibility operates in a time frame. And what was justified on day one may not be justified on day 500. And techniques and the necessity of engaging with a fully armed, robust terrorist group is different than when you are standing in the rubble of Gaza and you've essentially decapitated Gaza. The other thing that very curious to get your point of view because you've dealt with the Israeli government before. They say, well, we can't stop until Hamas is destroyed. By what means do you measure this? Is it like if there's a single guy with a gun, does that not count? How do you measure that?
yeah, look, I actually worked on like starting in October of 2023, like I was very involved in working on day after plans for Gaza.
Yes.
We learned from Iraq. We learned from Vietnam. We
Yeah.
learned from Afghanistan. Like if you like military by itself, like doesn't work. You need a political plan, you need a security plan, you need a substitute. Now, the problem we figured out very quickly was the only real substitute for Hamas ultimately isn't a Palestinian substitute, right? You're not going to have somebody else come in there. Well, that's completely anathema to Bibi Netanyahu's like coalition partners, right? Like the second he starts like going down that pathway, his government collapses, he's out of power, he's in legal jeopardy. And so for 2 years, he's stalled on ever
Yeah.
having that conversation. And like that just keeps the war going. But the reality is like there's nothing else to do militarily. I mean, Jen, I want to like ask you like a question about this too, because this is like something you and I were talking about this before. I mean, it's really this moment, and like you're a part of it. Like it really also just demonstrates an evolution of where the American Jewish community is. I mean, like I can't imagine you ever personally believed that you would be writing like the piece that you published today in the country.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, when people say, "Well, you've changed." Of course we've changed because we're human beings living in a world that you have to take in information. You have to be judged and judged by experience and evolution. Several things remain core factors for me. Israel has the right to be a Jewish state. Israel must be a democracy. The security of Israel is in the United States' interest. Still believe those things. But so many other things have changed, and the Israeli government has changed to such a degree that you have to be willing to, first of all, separate some support for the Israeli people who are much closer to you and I. From the government, which has about a tiny approval rating at this point and could not survive most likely an election at this point. So you have to kind of disentangle yourself, I think, from the notion that if you support Israel, you have to support the Israeli government. That, by and large, kind of worked when you had an Israeli government that behaved within certain international norms and Jewish values, frankly. And when they don't, just like in this country, when democratic norms are broken, you have to make note of it. You have to respond in an important fashion. So I think it's a matter of watching what has unfolded, how the world has evolved, and struggling to be a good friend to Israel. And it may sound patronizing, and we don't live in Israel. We understand that the people who do live there, have make the ultimate sacrifice in some sense and have to defend themselves. But that doesn't mean that they can count on unreflective, uncompromising, automatic support from the American Jewish community. That doesn't come as a guarantee. And frankly, this prime minister has gone so far as to frankly push away the American Jewish community as if we're not important. He'd rather, please the white Christian nationalists of America. So, well, I guess if he doesn't want our consent, he can't really complain when we do voice criticism. And it's not just us. It's not just a tiny segment of the American Jewish community. You now are developing a broad consensus and a broad political consensus. So it's not a mainstream position to say, Bibi Netanyahu, the highway or no way. That's not mainstream. That's not realistic. That's not a position rooted in Jewish values. So you're right. We've come a long way, but I never also thought that we'd have a president who was destroying the rule of law. I never thought we'd have a president who was attacking the press. I never thought we'd have a chief justice who gave criminal immunity to the president of the United States. Lots of stuff has really changed. And if you don't see what's going on and react in reasonable time to events, then you're lost. It's not a value. It's not a good thing to brag. The world has changed dramatically, but I'm still sticking to my guns. We're human beings. We have an obligation to look around, see what's going on, and make informed judgments. And in some cases, that does change your views. In other cases, it doesn't. But to be immune to new ideas, to new facts, really should not be what a free, intelligent people are all about.
Yeah, no, and I will tell you, like, what you're talking about is like one of the things I find at J Street is every day I am talking to people who, 10 years ago were at, APAC or ADL or like some of these other like sort of traditional Jewish
Right.
organizations. And like now they're finding their way to us because like we
Yes.
haven't changed, but like, I kind of sometimes describe it, and this is what I felt when I was working for, on the campaign for Vice President Harris as her Jewish outreach director. Like you had this, especially after October 7th, this massive split where a lot of people just went very hard right, like pro Bibi Netanyahu no matter what. And then you also had, frankly, also on the left, some real challenges where, inside the Democratic Party, where folks went off the rails in terms of, immediate instinctual criticism of Israel, like while you're still recovering from this horrific attack on October 7th. But like, that's not where the overwhelming majority of the American Jewish community is. It's not where overwhelming majority of Democrats are. Like you can see like multiple Jews at once, and you can see this reality, and like that's like where I am. And I'll tell you, like we have like a vote coming up later today in the Senate. Probably it's all still a little murky on some particular arms sales to Israel, like bombs, and talking about like rifles that you know um that like might go to like police that is controlled by Ben Gvir, who's talking about giving it to settlers. Um, I like never myself in terms of my own evolution, right? Like I never thought there would be a world where I would be supporting votes in Congress to like block, arms sales to Israel. But like, this is, and it's something that's made me uncomfortable even after like I started J Street, even though J Street's been there a little bit further than I. But like this one today in particular, like given like everything that we are facing, like I've never been so comfortable about something like that.
Yeah,
You can, yeah,
I think that's right, and I think you have to also be able to, not overgeneralize. Um, if you need to have a specific response, then one of these steps may be what you need as a specific
yeah.
step. It's not a renunciation of our alliance with Israel. It's not we're cutting off all aid. It's not we're not interested in Israel's defense. But you have to have some leverage. This prime minister has run rings around presidents, frankly, of both parties. He has taken advantage of the natural affinity that Americans have for Israel, and he has abused it. And now he thinks he can do anything without consequence. And there has to be some response. And in particular, after we intervened in a war on Israel's behalf against Iran, listen, it was based on our self-interest as well. But after that, no one can really doubt that we have Israel's back. So when we take a step like this, that frankly is meant to be more symbolic, the significance of any one weapon is not so great, then I think you have to take a step back and say, you know what? This whole party line, this whole, chant that you can never deny arms to Israel has to be rethought and to be really calibrated for the moment.
Yeah, and look, of course, like look, I spent years working on arms sales to Israel and support, like, and of course on like so many, and also support obviously as does J Street, like all the defensive arms, whether it's missile defense, Iron Dome, Arrow, David Sling, all those things are like
Right.
vital to Israel's security and things that are, and you can support all that without necessarily supporting every single you know um one of these sales. I also,
That-
Jen, I wanted to ask you like something else just as we're talking about this, because like you've had your own political evolution
Yep.
also from like conservative movements to where you are now. Like it's interesting to also see what's happening on this issue inside the conservative movement. You see people like Tucker Carlson and
Yes.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, like how do you read all of that? Kind of try to. I'm really struggling to understand it. Maybe like I'm
I
hoping you have a
they
understanding than I do.
I'll give a couple clarifications. I don't consider them conservatives. They are unthinking reactionaries. So trying to figure out their thought process and their rationale for anything, I try not to, frankly. It's too hard and it's not very productive. If you wanted to look at the evolution of people who have some principles left, and I got to say, there aren't very many in the Republican Party. A Republican Party that can line up behind an Emil Bove or rubber stamp a Pete Hegseth is not one that's based on any conservative values I was ever familiar with. But be that as it may, I think there gets to be a point in which reality intrudes, in which they understand that it's not productive to continue to do business as usual, that they have to have some lines that they draw somewhere. And I think, listen, I have had an evolution. And in part, that's because a lot of what the Republican Party espoused turned out to be bullshit. They didn't believe it. They don't believe in limited government. They don't believe in the rule of law. They don't believe in free trade. They don't believe in legal immigration. So if they're not going to believe in the things I believe in, I'm out of there. Now, it is also true I have evolved in terms of policy on a number of fronts. And again, just like Israel, you can't go through life stuck in a particular time zone like Donald Trump, where your entire framework for looking at the world is 1950 or 1970 or 1980. We have seen such dramatic changes in this country, such a dramatic accumulation of wealth at the very, very top, that it is unsustainable, in my view, in a democracy. And that demands a more robust, a more activist government. And for me, I thought the Biden administration, from a policy standpoint domestically, got it just about right. That they were trying to, as the president and the vice president used to say, grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, meaning do things that empower the middle class, that make 21st century technology and business interested in doing business here, and at the same time to make sure that the average person can get by, whether that's healthcare subsidies under the Affordable Care Act, whether that's a check during a pandemic. And we now see what happens as Trump is trying to undo this, and the harm, the damage, the human catastrophe that we are looking at. So, yeah, of course I have changed because events have changed on the ground. And unless you're going to take a very extreme libertarian position, which I have never taken, then you have to say, listen, there has to be a balance. There has to be a counterweight to a huge accumulation of wealth and power. And there has to be a correction when the Supreme Court goes off the rails and when the president goes off the rails. So just because they have a letter of a party that you used to once subscribe to doesn't mean they still hold those values, and their behavior and their stances is really just antithetical in so many respects to me, aside from the fact that they operate in a parallel factual universe where truth doesn't matter. So, yes, I've definitely evolved as time has gone on. And I kind of wonder, like, why haven't more people? And it continually amazes me that the careerism, the cowardice, the go-it-alongism that you see on the right, and you pointed out in the Senate, like, these people understand that Emile Beauvais is a disaster. They knew that RFK Jr. was unfit to be the head of HHS, and they voted for him anyway because they're just toadies. So if you actually believe in something, then you have to change because, gosh, I actually believe in science. I actually believe in vaccination. So of course I'm not going to support these people.
Yeah, no, I like Jen, I didn't really until we were having this conversation. It's also just like because like what you were talking about, just taking it back to from a J Street perspective and my own personal evolution and perspective too. It's like it is the journey you are describing, just like on a series of issues and how you
Yes.
approach the world is so like similar to a journey so many of our supporters and
Yep.
members and leaders like and have gone through like over the last 10 or 15 years or more, like in terms of like their views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and on Israel and how all these things relate, which is just like the more you study and the more things move, you're like, wait a minute, like, and suddenly you just like, I didn't move or I just kept my same values, but suddenly like I'm in a very different place or with a very different,
Right.
but it's still those same values, right? And it's still,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Um,
And, it's also a matter of priorities. Um, at this moment in time, I will make common cause with anybody who is defending the rule of law, democracy, truth, and some issues that used to divide us at the margins aren't as important to me. And I may have a slightly different perspective having been outside the Democratic Party. The Democratic coalition, small d Democratic, has to be big enough to include a Mamdani and a Roy Cooper, because that's the pro-democracy alliance you need. Otherwise, the alternative is MAGA fascism. And, you know, are we going to put aside some of the policy and tonal differences, or are we going to give way to infighting and purity tests and all the rest of it so that the other side has a clear field? And I think it's also a matter of, emphasis. We can argue about the right marginal tax rate, after we get our democracy back, and we can have that discussion. Now is not the time to focus on that.
Yeah, no, and I will tell you, like at J Street, one of the things we've done actually on this whatever we call it, podcast, show, whatever. Jeremy and I
Substack
have had a
Live,
couple
whatever.
weeks where we've really on Mamdani, which you talked about, like,
Yeah.
like we had Brad Lander on here. We had, three different New York Jewish voters, one who voted for Cuomo, one who voted for Mamdani, and one who voted for but we can have hard conversations
Yep.
about, we don't necessarily see eye to eye with Mamdani on, some really hard issues in terms of the
Yep.
Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but that's okay. Like there's like that doesn't mean A, he's anti-Semitic, like, and we just have to write him off that way. And B, like, you know, we can disagree and also have concerns about how he expresses certain things, but we can also talk to him about it. Like that's part of what you do in broad coalitions. And we actually have a lot of our J Street members, like in New York in particular, engaging with him and like explaining, like, like this is how we see it as liberal American Jews who, like align with you on so much. As you said, we do have some disagreements with you on some of
Right.
these issues. Like, just hear us out and let's have a conversation about it. It does actually like pivot me a little bit, like, because there is this interesting overlap also, right, between like what you're talking about and fighting for democracy and fighting for our rights, and like concerns over like legitimate concerns that we've seen on the rise over anti-Semitism, both from the right but also from the left after October 7th.
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely. And
but then, like we see Trump using all of that for all the
yes,
worst things. And I'm interested to
right.
hear your take on that.
Absolutely. The fact that he would use anti Semitism, which was evident on campuses, as a cudgel to destroy academic independence is so cynical, is so ridiculous. You can be in favor of certain reforms, which colleges, universities have taken to improve the atmosphere, to guarantee the safety of Jewish students and the atmosphere. You can be in favor of all that, but not go along with the notion that the federal government should be telling Harvard or Columbia or any other university how to run their academic departments. That's obscene. And so I think it does require that we make some differentiation. We can, nuance is not a bad word, and it sometimes requires some. This administration is very good at lumping things that are not the same together so that they can paint their opponents as extremists. And we have to not accept that. We can't just accept the terminology, the language that they use, because then we're playing on, their ball game. And, you said something that was so interesting about Mamdani. Since when did we have like a slate of perfect candidates who everybody in a single family could agree with, let alone in the Democratic coalition? We forget both the small d Democratic coalition and the Democratic Party, big D, has always been a coalition. It has labor, it has farmers, it has workers, it has minorities, it has academics. And you are bound by certain core values. And so if we're going to get into this game of, divide and conquer, we're going to be lost. And my co-founder and partner, Norm Eisen, who's looked around at this issue around the world, has found the difference between winning and losing against an authoritarian power is whether the opposition can stick together. They stuck together in Poland, and they were able to more or less get their democracy back, although they've had a setback. In Hungary, they splintered. And so Orban has become incredibly strong. So I think we have to get our priorities right at the same time that we are maintaining our values. So it gives me great hope to see that in some ways, you guys, the Jewish Democratic Coalition, the rabbinate, are leading some of these other Jewish organizations to a place where we are in further agreement. I think many of these organizations, because of their membership, because of their traditional stands, because of a perspective that was formed pre 67, have gotten into a certain, I don't want to say stodginess, but a certain framework that made them less um, flexible, less quick to comprehend that this is an inflection moment. And I'm so pleased to see that slowly, many of them are coming along. I like them to come along a little faster, but they are. And just as we had patience with Amdani, we have to have patience with some of these other kind of legacy Jewish organizations because we ultimately are on the same side. So I think it's a healthy dynamic. There's a push pull, and you guys can be proud that you're, the tip of the spear in many instances. But it does take a lot of people, a lot of ways to kind of wrestle with this and come around to this. I got to say, I can write a piece in no time at all. I love writing. Writing comes easily to me. I struggled with that piece that I put up today. It's hard. It's hard to wrestle with these issues. It's hard to take stock of the conflicting values, and it's hard moral work and emotional work, but we have to do it.
Yeah, no, that is like so true. Like for me, and I'll tell you, Jen, like when I for me it's kind of funny. Like when I write a piece about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or something happening in the Middle East, it's just my analyst hat clicks on and I can like turn it out in like,
Yep.
half an hour or something like that.
Yep.
But when I'm writing about like American Jewry, when I'm writing about my personal experiences and I'm writing about the struggles here, like, and how you weigh these really complicated, like, sort of like personal things, like,
Yes.
oof, it's, yeah, it's like, it's very different. I should say, look, like the Mamdani thing has been like a real bellwether in some ways. Like one thing I'll just say about it, because this has just kind of been our approach is, you know, um, you know, the one thing like everybody like really got frustrated, like upset with him, I think, in the Jewish community about is like the refusal to, just more clearly like condemn like the global as the Intifada language, which he does not use and he says he doesn't use. And um, for American Jews, like, like you associate with the second Intifada, you associate with like bus bombings and violence, and that's
Yep.
real. When I talk to Arab American friends, like they really like have a different view of that word and history of that word. And what we try to encourage him to do, and what I've at least like is like we don't he doesn't need to condemn where he came from, and like
Right.
he doesn't need to. It would be great if he would like just and he's I think that you see the language changing, like, and
Yes.
this is what you do when you engage, like just give a nod to the sympathy, like, and like that you understand why American Jews have a problem with that word.
Right.
Like, you know, um, you know, but it's like I will say it's yeah, that's for me, like that's been that piece of it. And also just, the use of like the anti-Semitism charge to just try to cut off all debate on the thing we were talking. Like that's not just the Trump administration. I mean, there is a big part of it is kind of attacking universities. It's also about speech, right? Like we can have like this debate and this discussion and be deeply concerned about what's happening in Israel, um, without calling somebody an anti-Semite. Like
Yes.
that's not hard, guys.
It exactly. And you know, I also get very frustrated. The mayor of New York is not a foreign policy position. I understand we don't want him using language that is inflammatory and hateful and evokes great fear among Jews. As you said, he's pledged that he doesn't use it, he doesn't approve of it. He has explained that from his perspective, it is does not mean what we think it means. Listen, from my perspective, if there's a group that feels extremely sensitive about a term of art, a term of rhetoric, I'm not going to use it because I can show some empathy and see it from their side too. That's hard when you're a politician and you have competing demands. And we get, whether it's in Israel on starvation or on the war or on Mandani, we get so hung up on the labeling and the language that we sometimes fail to see what is at the root of it, what is the worldview, what is the perspective, and that we have to. It takes work, like you said. You have to engage. You have to have a conversation. And listen, if there were some perfect candidate other than the guy who has been was indicted 5 times and then given a sweetheart deal by the Trump administration, or there was a guy who hadn't been forced to resign from the governorship in disgrace over very credible sexual harassment complaints, you might have a more competitive race, but you got to choose in a democracy. So, it doesn't seem to me like it's an impossible choice.
Yeah, no, for sure. Sorry, I'm having a moment here, but
Right.
but Jen, one other thing I wanted to also get your take on, going back to Bibi Netanyahu. You were talking about this, right? Different countries under threat. Norm talks about this like how you fight back. There is this kind of alliance of like wannabe autocrats and actual autocrats, right?
Yeah.
And like, how do you see that when you look at the Trump and Netanyahu relationship?
Oh, it absolutely is at play. And Netanyahu appeals to this in Trump because he tries to manipulate him because of that. They attempt to play to his gigantic ego and to diminish critics as, haters, as out of the mainstream. But of course, these people kind of hang together because it's a threat. It's as much of a threat to Putin what goes on in Ukraine as what goes on in Moscow. Once people see an alternative, once people see a functioning, thriving, diverse democracy, that threatens autocrats. So of course they band together because they don't like democracy. They don't like it in their own home. They don't like it around the world, and there is safety for them in numbers. So they collaborate. And some of the same tactics, whether it was Bibi's attack on the judicial system, trying to tame judges. Oh, by the way, we've seen this play before. Whether it was the use of incendiary language and then a game of we didn't say that, I didn't say that, whether it's a willingness to rewrite history, these come out of the same playbook. And we've seen a lot of them before. So if you're kind of wise to the autocratic playbook game, you recognize a lot of similarities. And I think we have to be clear eyed that it's not like we're taking a position that the majority of Israelis reject. A majority of Israelis agree with you and me. So who's being supportive of the Israeli people, the Israeli country? And you know this because you have worked in foreign policy for decades. You are not loyal to a specific person. You are loyal to a relationship, a country, and a people. And that's what we have to keep the eye on the ball. Otherwise, you're playing this game that Trump plays. I like this leader. I don't like that leader. I'm going to make life, rough on Merkel. I'm going to kiss up to Orban because they sound like me. You have to kind of see through it and see what the relationship and the value system is of the other country. And that's the basis for the relationship.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've seen. I mean, it's also a pretty sharp contrast here between Joe Biden and Donald Trump in
Yeah.
terms of both the way Bibi Netanyahu has behaved since. Like, the second Trump was in, like Bibi starts like tweeting about the deep state and like just
Yeah.
going at a whole different level. I
Yep.
don't know if you saw this one, but like Mike Huckabee actually went
Yes.
to, to like Bibi's trial, which has been going on forever last week. This is all like Trump's trying to cut deals with Bibi where he's like, yeah, like if you do give me a little bit more on this and that in the region, and I'll like apply all this pressure. I mean, at one point, Trump actually even said, like, if Israel doesn't stop these ridiculous, I remember what it was, these trials of Bibi Netanyahu, we can't be wasting all this aid that we're giving Israel if they're going to be putting their prime minister like, so like, you want to talk about conditioning aid? I
Yeah.
mean, to keep an autocrat, to basically violate laws. And it's also, I will say just another comparison here is like, people forget this. During that year before October 7th, when you had this, the democracy protests and the judicial
Right,
efforts in Israel. Bibi Netanyahu did not get a visit to the White House for a whole year since when
right.
he became prime minister again. And there was a reason for that,
Yeah,
and that reason had to do with what was happening to Israeli democracy. Um, and all that changed after October 7th. But I mean, it's like compare that to Donald Trump, who is just rolling open, you know, the red carpet no matter what, and it's a very very sharp contrast between the two of them.
absolutely. And, with Biden, you knew what his core values were. He knew he was in favor of democracy. You knew he was in favor of America as a constructive force in the world. You knew he was in favor of national sovereignty, that you didn't invade your neighbor. With Trump, it's all dependent upon who's kissing up to him. One week he is pro Putin, the next threatening Putin. One week he's in love with NATO, the next week, he's screaming at them again. He, has the attention span of a flea, and he has no core principles. So it makes it impossible for other countries, other than to bribe and flatter him, which they have all learned to do, to navigate, because he's nuts. And it's all about him. It's always about him.
Yeah, and it's been it's been fascinating and terrible and horrible to watch. I will say, one other thing where, and I'll just take him like where this relationship has also been fascinating to watch is what we saw, on Iran a few weeks ago. Um, you know, with with um with the war. I will say, you know, I think it probably worked out like given the huge risks, like I think it could have been so much worse with the rolling of the die of the U.S. actually getting militarily involved. It didn't, which was good. And I always said, as somebody who spent a lot of time planning and looking at those scenarios, that it really might not. It might be like I remember you and I doing like 5 minutes into the U.S. bombing Iran.
Right.
You and I doing one of these. And I kind of said at the time, like, we'll have to wait and see how the retaliation goes. And the Iranians might go big or they might really go small. And they went small, which was great. But I will say, like, looking at it now, like 6 weeks later, we've had this temporary kind of like setback for Iran's nuclear program. We have zero visibility into the program,
Yes.
don't know what is happening. The IAEA can't get back in. There's, and Iran, it doesn't take a lot to rebuild now. They don't have to rebuild the way they had it before. And, where are we like a year or two from now? We don't have a sustainable diplomatic deal, but instead, like, is Israel going to be bombing Iran every 2 years with American assistance? Like, is that what the world
Exactly.
is going to in the Middle East?
And just like you said, these don't have military solutions, because at some point you have to stop and put in something else. We had disagreements back and forth, JCPOA, something better, something different, but now we got nothing. And as you said, one of the reasons why it didn't spin out of control, by the way, is in retrospect, it was kind of performative. We dropped some bombs and then we went away. This was not obliterating their nuclear program as Donald Trump promised. So Israel could see that we weren't really about obliterating their nuclear program. And so they didn't retaliate. So for Trump, it's all about show. It's all about getting to go on TV and say, oh, look what I did. I obliterated their program, which he did not. So I think you were right whether it's Gaza, whether it's Iran, whether it's anything else, at some point you have to have a political settlement, because you can't be at war forever. But that's why authoritarians like war, because they don't have to make settlements. And in wartime, everyone gives them a lot of power and a lot of authority, and dissent can be muffled. So it's no surprise that these people thrive on conflict, and conflict that exceeds the original purpose of the conflict. So I think we have to keep our eye on the ball. I am curious what you think is going on with Iran. There's periodically some indication there are some talks going on. Maybe the Europeans are talking, but I don't see what incentive the Iranians have to make any deals at this point since, Trump bombed them and they now know at the drop of a hat, Israel will bomb them. So why make a deal at all?
I mean, I think the like right now we've got this situation. We do have these sanctions that Europe might reapply on Iran
Yep.
coming over the next. They're kind of a leftover from the JCPOA days, so that gives the Iranians some incentive that they care about to try
Right.
to like keep those from happening. But it's not enough. It doesn't outweigh everything else you're talking about. So I see the likelihood of a deal right now of some kind of deal to be very small.
Right.
Um, you know, like, yeah, so that's kind of like we're in this weird world. But even if you do a deal now, we've lost eyes. This is one of the crazy things
Yeah.
about the fact that like there was all this nuclear material. It's unclear exactly if it was destroyed or not. There's they had centrifuge pieces all over the place. Now the IAEA has been kicked out. There's really a lot less visibility. Now Israel, us, we still have a lot of kind of intelligence capability. It was clear from the war that like the Israelis knew a
Yeah.
lot about like
Right.
the Iranian nuclear program. So, but you're just counting on that without having the IAEA. And the other thing is, when you're counting on that kind of intelligence and you're trying to build international support and do things, who trusts Donald Trump? Who
Exactly.
trusts Bibi Netanyahu? Like we've seen,
Absolutely.
I mean, look, like go back to 2003 and like the like with a frankly a much more trustworthy administration that I think meant well and got like really convinced after October 7th and made huge mistakes. Um, you know, also cut corners, but like with the Iraq War, or ultimately ended up being a deception. Um, and this is just putting that on steroids. And so it's a rough spot to be in. Jen, I know
Absolutely.
yeah, we're getting close to wrapping up, and I need to roll out in a couple minutes. I just want to ask you like one final question, which is just we're just now 6 months into Donald Trump. We're also basically 6 months into the contrarian, and the fight for democracy. And so I guess to wrap up, I know that J Street's viewers would love, our word on the street live viewers would love to know, like what's your assessment? How are we doing in this fight for democracy?
Well, I'll say this. Our democracy is in worse shape than it was when Donald Trump took office. You can't look at what's gone on and not see the damage in the human terms, in the big ugly bill, in legal terms, in the kind of police state they've stood up to deal with illegal immigration, which now isn't even focused on illegal immigration, but sweeps up legal immigrants and U.S. citizens born here. You can't look at all that and not say we're in a worse shape than we were. But I think we have also been able to stand up and galvanize a reaction. And that reaction you see in courts day after day after day. I'll have a piece tomorrow or actually on Friday, on the state's attorneys general, who are really again, really on the front lines. You see mass demonstrations, much larger than in Trump 1, although the media hasn't always portrayed that. You do see some law firms, you do see some universities pushing back. And it's hard work. You have to stay engaged. But I think given where the political landscape is and how badly the Trump people have overreached and abused, you can see their poll numbers sinking. You can see them coming down on even their strong issues. That what we now have to do is keep our eye on the ball for 2026. I cannot stress enough how critical it is to at least win back the House. That is the only way in which you get to put any kind of brake on him. And if we're successful there, then just as we did from 2018 to 2020, that serves as a launching pad to take back both houses and the White House in 2028. So there is a lot to be down in the dumps about, but I am also extremely encouraged by independent media, of which I'm now very proud to be a part of. The reaction of the American people, a lot of great leadership from the states and from labor unions. And I think we are now in a position where we can do this. We can come back. But we're only 6 months in. We got a long ways to go even to the midterms, and that's just round 1. So, it's hard work, guys, I know, but no one said democracy was easy.
No, I mean, I think that's a great one, like, sort of way to end. Yeah, 100%. Thank you, Jen, so much for doing this with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
You
It's been
know,
fun.
yeah, for sure. And for our followers, we'll be back with Word on the Street live next week, 4 o'clock. If you follow the Contrarian and you want to get a little more Israel specific, like first of all, if you follow Word on the Street, follow the Contrarian. If you're coming to us from the Contrarian and you want to get a little more like Israel specific and Jewish issue specific, anti-Semitism stuff, like join, also follow Word on the Street or Dialogue and Dissonance. And other than that, like, just Jen, thank you very much for doing this and for
You're
everything that you're
very
doing. And
welcome. It's a pleasure. Take care.
all right, take care.
Bye.